I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, developments regarding the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank, which may have significance in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Palestinian Media Watch, the fabulous organization founded and directed by Itamar Marcus to monitor what is being said in Arabic by the Palestinian leadership, and which reports on all anti-Israel actions taken by the Palestinian Authority and others in the Palestinian community, most of which is never reported in the American or world media. PMW, as it's known, has just published a piece in which the Palestinian Authority itself is acknowledging the enormous benefits Palestinian workers enjoy when they work for Israeli companies on the West Bank, in contrast to less favorable conditions they experience when they are employed by Palestinians. Now, if you're aware of the BDS movement, the attempts to impose a system of boycotts, divestments from Israeli companies, and sanctions against the State of Israel, you know that there is an incessant and hideous stream of criticism and condemnation of Israeli occupation, and for the suggestion that Israel is brutalizing and persecuting Palestinians on the West Bank. In contrast to this anti-Semitic propaganda, and that's what the BS movement is, as Shachar Azani explains during a talk you can see this week on JBS, or online after this week. The BDS movement is simply the new anti-Semitism. But in contrast to the anti-Semitic lies of the BDS movement, there comes this latest story highlighted by Palestinian Media Watch, revealing the simple truth about the way in which the State of Israel and individual Israelis are improving the daily lives of countless numbers of Palestinian workers. The report reads in part, Palestinian Authority's official daily lauded Israel and Israeli employers of Palestinians for their positive employment ethics towards their Palestinian workers. At the same time, the article condemned Palestinian employers for taking advantage of their workers. The only cases in which a Palestinian worker does not receive the salary his Israeli employer determined for him are those cases in which the middleman is Palestinian. And that comes from Al-Hayat Al-Jadida, which is the official daily newspaper of the Palestinian National Authority. Well, to tell us more about this story, I'm so pleased to welcome back to JBS the director of Palestinian Media Watch, Itamar Marcus, who joins us by phone from Israel. Itamar, thank you for joining us once again.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Mark.
Thank you. First of all, Itamar, please summarize for the JBS audience, summarize for us what PMW has reported on this issue of the relative merits of Israeli employment of Palestinians as opposed to the experience Palestinians encounter when they work for Palestinian bosses.
Palestinians who work for Israelis, and this is if they work for Israelis within the State of Israel or in Judea, Samaria, West Bank, wherever they work for Israelis, they are protected by the same labor laws that protect Israeli workers. So they get minimum wage, the same minimum wage. They have health insurance. In one of the articles that we reported on, a Palestinian worker described how he was injured or got sick, and he was out of work for a number of months, and the entire time he continued getting compensation, almost his full salary during that period of time, whereas in the Palestinian world that's unheard of. Mm-hmm. So what it is, it's basically a tipping of the hat and an acknowledgement that Israel gives excellent treatment to Palestinian workers who work for them. The purpose of the article, which from our perspective, it makes Israelis very proud, but the purpose of the article was not really to give praise to Israeli workers, of course, because the Palestinian Authority paper is not interested in giving anything positive usually about Israel. The purpose was really to put pressure on their own employers to embarrass them by showing them, look what Israel is doing. And this is Israel we're talking about, the one who 99% of the time we're condemning. Look what they're doing for Palestinian. There's a fantastic statement in this article where it says, whenever Palestinian workers have the opportunity to work for an Israeli employer, they will quit their jobs with the Palestinian employers.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're saying is everyone knows that Palestinians would prefer working for Israelis. And again, this is something that Israelis should be very proud about, that in spite of the terror, in spite of the violence, in spite of the Palestinian hate promotion and incitement, in spite of all of that, we just want to be good neighbors to Palestinians. And if they're working for us, we want to give them the full benefits of workers' rights.
Well, you say it so beautifully, Itamar, and it seems to me the fact that this comes out of a official Palestinian Authority journal has enormous ramifications. You know, we rarely hear positive things about Israel coming out of the PA. And you personally have been very critical of the PA's anti-Israel, anti-Semitic propaganda on official PA television and on the official PA website. You explained to us why you think this piece was written, but were you surprised at all that the Palestinian Authority would put such a positive spin on something related to the state of Israel? They had to know that it would make Israel look good to some extent.
Absolutely, yes. We were actually very pleasantly surprised, because one of the things that would eventually and is necessary eventually to lead the peace is to have the Palestinian official newspapers and official television start presenting Israelis as we are, which is really just people who want to have good neighborly relations with them. So this kind of an article could be a breakthrough. Unfortunately, it was a one-time item, and right now it hasn't really been repeated. So what we're hoping is that this is something, every time we see something like this, we say, okay, this is what we need. We understand what we need to create peace. And this is something that we, of course, publicize, and hopefully the publication of it will bring reinforcement to whoever it is in charge of every particular newspaper and PATV. And they'll realize that there is another way you can promote peace.
Yes, I give you and Palestinian Media Watch enormous credit, because, again, you normally are telling us all the things that should trouble American Jewry. I would wish that it would trouble the world as a whole. And then you came out with what, again, you explained that there may be an underlying motive against Palestinian employers more than trying to, in some way, make Israel look good, but the peace does make Israel look good. And you know...
Absolutely. I might add, by the way, that's just my interpretation. In the article itself, it doesn't say that. The article itself just makes Israel look good. I'm just trying to make some sense of it. The article was critical of Palestinian employers, and that's what we're thinking.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. The article itself just makes Israel look good.
So, you know, Itamar, the Jewish world hopes there's a way to one day make peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. And the Israeli people have indicated overwhelmingly, time and time again, more than 80% at times, that for real peace, Israelis are prepared to help create a Palestinian state on the West Bank and to live side by side with that Palestinian state as the United States lives with Canada. The problem has been that since 1938, Itamar, every time the Jewish world says it's willing to share the land of Eretz Yisrael with the Arab people, the Arab and Palestinian response has been that they will never, ever, ever agree to share the land at every opportunity, at every offer made by the State of Israel, after Levi Eshkol's offer after the Six-Day War of 1967, again after Ehud Barak's offer to Yasser Arafat at Camp David in 2000, after Ariel Sharon's dramatic withdrawal from all of Gaza in 2005, after Ehud Olmert's offer to Mahmoud Abbas in 2008, even after the Obama-Kerry peace initiative last year. The Arab-Palestinian Islamic response has been, we will never share the land with the infidel Zionist Jewish state, which must ultimately be eliminated from the region altogether. So the question, Itamar, is, does the fact that the PA would publish such a pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian story signal to your mind any change in their thinking? Is it a potential softening of policy that indicates perhaps this time the suggestion that Palestinians are ready to make peace with Israel and to agree again for the first time ever to share the land with the Jewish state? Is that now in your mind in even a remote possibility?
Well, you're talking about a major jump here, and I'll just quote something to you from Palestinian television children's program just a few months ago. And you'll be able to really answer this on your own. The boy on the TV program he mentions, the host asks him, tell us about the lands that are under Israel's occupation at the moment. And the boy answers, Haifa, Jaffa, and Akko. 3, of course, Israeli cities, not in the West Bank. And he says, these are the ones under occupation. And the moderator says, correct. And Nazareth as well. And then she continues. This information should be inside of us all the time. The occupation must know and understand and be confident that this land belongs to us. The 48 lands are all ours and will return to us, right? And the boy says, yes, of course. This message that Haifa, Jaffa, Akko, and by the way, they don't refer to them as Israel. They refer to them, they won't say the word Israel on the children's program. They're called the 48 lands. 48, of course, referring to 1948, the year Israel was created, so that they were British Palestine before then, but she calls them Palestine, the 1948 lands. Now, this was in November, and then a month later in December, so we're talking about just less than a month ago, or just a month ago. She talked again about all of these lands, and she said, all of these lands will return to Palestinian rule and will exist under the name of the state of Palestine. This is the way Palestinian children are brought up today, to see every bit of Israel as occupation. There were 2 occupations, the occupation of 1948, the occupation of 1967. Both are equally illegal according to the messages that Palestinian children are being brought up on. That's why I say I don't see this one article that focuses on Israel's great treatment of Palestinian workers. I don't see that as a major breakthrough. When I see a children's program that'll tell children Haifa, Jaffa, and Akko are part of the state of Israel and we're going to be good neighbors with them, that will be a revolution in Palestinian education. That will be a revolution in Palestinian thinking. And when that happens, we will begin to have a possible peace process. But as long as kids are brought up that everything is Palestine and that the whole entire peace process is actually just to get Israel to borders that make its existence even more precarious, well, then the peace process hasn't started yet.
Itamar, what do you feel the attitudes of average Palestinians are toward peace with Israel?
I think the older Palestinians, much older Palestinians who were brought up and raised and lived before the Oslo Accords, I think that population would, under right conditions of compromise, be willing to make peace with Israel. Those are people who knew Israelis. Those are people who understood that Israel really, and I'll say this expression again, really just wanted to be good neighbors with them. The younger generation, unfortunately, has not been brought up to see Israelis other than as occupiers, and worse than occupiers. I mentioned the program that dealt with that same children's program where the moderator taught that every bit of Israel is occupied Palestine. In November of this year, she had a young girl on TV who she asked to recite a poem that she learned by heart.
Yes.
And the poem included the words, "Our enemy Zion is Satan, Satan with a tail." And what does the moderator say at the end? "Thank you very much. I really like this poem." Now, this young girl who looks probably 13, 14, 15, this is the 6th young child that we've heard say this poem, that Zion is Satan, in the last couple of years, unofficial Palestinian television. Well, when you're teaching your children that Jews are Satan, and they've also taught them this past year that Jews are monkeys and pigs and the enemies of Allah, when you're teaching all of this, it's clear that the leadership is not intending to prepare its people for peace. If they wanted to prepare the people for peace, they'd say, we have a conflict with Israel over land. They don't tell them that. They say, we have a conflict with Israel because the Jews are Satan, the Jews are monkeys and pigs, and the Jews are enemy of Allah. That will never be resolved by adjusting of borders.
Itamar, how much of this is Arab in general as opposed to Islamic theology in particular?
Well, when you say Arab in general,
In other words, there are also Christian Arabs.
Yep.
Do the Christian Arabs have the same view of Israel that Muslim Arabs have?
No, they can't, especially not amongst Palestinians, because the vast majority of Palestinian hatred that they're constantly demonizing Jews about is all based on Islamic traditions. They are drawing on Islamic traditions. They're twisting Islamic traditions. I'll just give you a fascinating example. I mentioned to you that they teach the children that Jews are apes and pigs. Well, this is very interesting because in the Quran, it actually says that there were these people who sinned. They didn't keep the Sabbath, and Allah turned them into monkeys and pigs. So these were clearly Jews. They were turned into monkeys and pigs, and in fact, it's mentioned 3 times in the Quran. Now, there's a very moderate interpretation of this in Islam, which says those people who sinned received their punishment, turned into apes and pigs, they died out, and that was the end of them. The problematic interpretation is that those apes and pigs then reproduced, and they reproduced and gave birth to Jews, and that today's Jews are descendants of those monkeys and pigs.
Yes.
Now, that is the interpretation that the Palestinian Authority has adopted. They didn't have to. They could have done, but they've adopted it. We hear it from religious leaders. We hear it from moderators at program. We hear it from teachers, and we hear it on the children's programs. So why if the Palestinian Authority is interested in peace with Israel, why do they seek out these complicated and problematic interpretations so that the children will look to Israelis as if we are subhuman descendants of monkeys and pigs? This is clearly something that is intending to prevent peace. And it's not just this, but dozens and dozens, hundreds of examples that we get all the time, which clearly indicate we don't yet have a partner who really wants to prepare their population for peace.
By the way, when you say there's no partner, aren't you really saying, and I wish it were said more clearly to the American audience in general, to American Jewry, and I wish it was said by the American administration, or at least they indicated they understood that that's not simply there's no partner. What you have at the moment is such a very different, radically different worldview that it's not about even evil, but there may be things that are evil in the way it is expressed. You know, when you go out and you stab people in the streets, you run them over with cars, or you shoot them in the cars in front of their children. There's something really evil about that. But a philosophy in and of itself, one could hold a religious philosophy, and it's not about people being evil. This is what they truly believe in their gut, in their instinct, in their soul. And the problem is that we have in the Islamic world, and it seems to me, Itamar, to be in control at the moment. The controlling factor in the Islamic world and in the Palestinian community that you're reporting on all the time is committed to a notion, a worldview, that it is impossible for them. They would have to be different human beings inside themselves to ever acknowledge the legitimate right of a Jewish presence in their land. And I keep using the word share because I don't think American Jewry really understands it. The American Jewish community has to understand the state of Israel, those in charge of the Jewish component in Palestine from the 1930s has always said, we will share the land. And you have another group which has said consistently to this day, over our dead body, we will never share the land. And then you have the West trying to say to both Israel and the Palestinians, why don't you create a two-state solution, which in essence is a means of sharing the land. One side has said repeatedly, we will share the land, and one side, Itamar, has said from day one, we will never share the land. I'd love you to react to that sort of formulation of what the problem really is.
That's absolutely correct. And what's making it even worse, and you sort of said this, but I want to really stress this, it's a worldview that the Palestinian Authority in recent years has adopted completely the Hamas religious ideology about the land. And I just want to quote you something that was said by one of the most important people in the Palestinian Authority, very, very close to Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PA, the chairman, president of the PA. He appointed Mahmoud al-Habash to be the head recently of the Palestinian Authority Sharia courts. He's the head of the religious courts, and he's also Abbas's advisor on Islamic affairs. So he's really his most important religious figure. Now, what did he say? The entire land of Palestine is waqf, and then he added it's prohibited to sell, bestow ownership, or facilitate the occupation of even a millimeter of it.
Yes.
Now, he's telling his population that not only don't Palestinians want to share the land in the name of Palestinian nationalism, but he's saying it's prohibited to accept Israel's existence on even a millimeter of the land in the name of Islam. Now, you're dealing with a very religious population here, and in polls we have found in recent years between 90 and 98% of Palestinians saying religion is important to them. And then their most important religious leader comes along and says that it's prohibited to accept Israel's right to exist. So you could never have this. If Mahmoud Abbas wanted to make peace with Israel, he would tell his religious leaders, find a way. Don't tell our population that this is prohibited. Find a way to make peace with them. But we're not hearing that. We're hearing just the opposite. So I think you're absolutely right. There has not yet been a decision on the Palestinian side to want to have peace with Israel. And not only are they saying this in the name of Palestinianism, but they're saying it in the name of Islam. These are two separate battles, by the way. There is a Palestinian nationalistic battle, which has certain components. There's the Palestinian Islamic battle, which has other components. The Islamic battle is much, much more difficult and much, much more complicated, much more impossible to resolve. And what's ironic is that when Abbas goes around the world and he goes to Washington, he claims that there's only a nationalistic issue and it's related to land. And so the international community accepts that myth, tries to deal with and come up with creative solutions for the land issue, completely ignoring the much more basic, much more difficult problem, which is the problem of the Islamization of the Palestinian Authority,
yes.
presenting it as an Islamic war. And that problem isn't even recognized yet as a problem, and yet that's the main problem. This is a great irony and a great tragedy.
Itamar, I want to push you one more time now from, if I had someone here speaking to you who really sees it differently, they would say the following to you. Itamar Marcus, Palestinian Media Watch, just did a story that shows that in the Palestinian world, there are Palestinians who can, even in the Palestinian Authority, can write something positive about the state of Israel. Why don't you, Itamar, see this as an opening? And why don't Israelis in general and American Jews in general come away from this with an enormous sense of optimism, which you don't seem to be expressing, that if there can be a story like this put out by the Palestinian Authority, it means that there are subtle forces which could be encouraged by Israeli policy to become stronger and stronger. And so, although on PA television and on the PA website, there is still virulent anti-Semitism, again, where Israelis and Jews are portrayed as the children, the descendants of pigs and apes. While that is true, you should be one of those leading the Israeli community, and there should be an understanding on the American Jewish scene that we must do everything we can to strengthen those in the Palestinian world who would write and publish the kind of story that we began with, a story which does portray Israel in a positive light. If there was someone here challenging you that way, Itamar, what would be your response?
We do everything that we can to give expression to things like this. In fact, when I lecture today around the world, the last slide that I show, it's not this one, but the last slide that I show is a young girl on Palestinian television, who actually made a very spontaneous, positive statement about Muslims, Christians, and Jews having to live together and love each other. And this was a fantastic statement. The last few slides in the presentation is peace is possible. And I say this is what has to be repeated over and over and over again for peace to be possible. Now, the unfortunate thing about that statement is that it was unique. It was said in 2014. There hasn't been another statement like it since 2014. But I still continue to show it because I'm doing exactly what you're trying. I'm trying to say peace is possible if only this message, that children are being taught that children must live together, Jews, Christians, and Muslims must love each other. If this was a constant message, then we would have we could be more optimistic. But this girl was interviewed by Palestinian television. She was asking what she had learned in a particular story that they had read in school, and this was her conclusion. Now, that was fantastic that was being taught, and that's why we publicize it. But tragically, like I said, we haven't heard anything like
understand.
this. And in the interim, we have heard not spontaneous statements, but initiated by the moderator that Jews are Satan, Jews are monkeys and pigs, etc., also on children's programming. So unfortunately, that sort of fades into the background. If we would see that happen and then hear it again and again, we would be dancing in the streets and publicizing it and saying, guess what, everybody? There is a new Palestinian Authority out there. We really believe peace now is something we can talk about.
Itamar, you're doing spectacular work. You've had the graciousness to sit with me in studio. We show your interview often. I can't thank you enough for everything you do, not only on behalf of the State of Israel, but really for the Jewish people as a whole. By the way, Itamar, where are you living now?
Efrat.
In Efrat. What's it like on the streets of Israel these days? What's the mood of the Israeli people after we saw, and we continue to see, basically Palestinians murdering Israeli Jews? What's your feeling these days as you walk the street and your children walk the street? What's the mood?
There is, it's tragic almost to say that when a situation continues after a certain period of time, you seem to almost get used to it, and it becomes part of the norm. And I'll even say that in terms of the news coverage, it used to be every time there was a stabbing, it was the top story. Certainly, if people get killed, it still is the top story. But when people are injured and not killed, it's not even the top story in the news anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I think the human psyche is made to get used to even the most difficult situations. And people were in shock the first few weeks, and people were turning around and looking around and see who's walking around them. But by now, you go out to work and you go back home from work, and you're a little bit more vigilant, and you're sort of looking around a little bit. But basically, what happens is the human mind and the human body adjusts, and people know we have to get on with life here in Israel. Everybody's getting on with life in Israel.
Well, everyone here at JBS and in the American Jewish community, I believe in America, wants you and your children and the State of Israel to live in peace, and we hope that in the very near future, something will happen to change it. I can't thank you enough, as I always do. Can't thank you enough for giving us time, and I will reach out to you often. Thank you very much, Itamar.
Thanks very much, and I hope the next time that I'm in the States, we can do this.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you very, very much. The thoughts of Itamar Marcus, the founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch. It's a critical website. You should be sure to read it if you're all concerned about the future of the State of Israel. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, program coordinator, Serge Goldberg, the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.